Penn State needed this commitment.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football recruiting. And as always, thank you so much for checking out another edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Seyko, and I am your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. Penn State gets a commitment. 4-star defensive end, in-state prospect, Jackson Ford joins Penn State's 2026 class. So we're going to talk about why this commitment was such a need for Penn State, go through the outlook for the class of 2026, and talk about what Jackson Ford is going to bring to the Nittany Lions, just briefly beginning with that. And then we're going to talk about Jackson Ford. Penn State needed this commitment for a variety of reasons after taking all the punches it did from Notre Dame, now Michigan on the recruiting trail, some other losses here and there. This was a win they needed to see. On top of that, they don't have any defensive ends. They don't have any edge defenders at this point. So Jackson Ford becomes that first true defensive end in this class of 2026. And remember, they had Daniel Jennings committed, but he reclassified. So that opens up a spot. Penn State gets a good player, a prospect with a lot of intangibles that I like, which I'm going to discuss here in just a second here. But Penn State needed this commitment between all of the losses that they endured on the recruiting trail here, and just out of the sake that you did not have a defensive end. You did not have a pass rusher. And now you get that with Jackson Ford. Pure pass rusher. You are getting a really talented pass rusher. There is a reason that Ohio State was pushing for him, Michigan as well. Penn State fended off the likes of Ohio State, Michigan, and Wisconsin to get Jackson Ford committed in the class of 2026. So this was not an easy recruitment. I know, dominate the state. Penn State should be able to win this kind of recruitment, and they did. But I'm just saying that they had to do a lot of heavy lifting to get there. So let's talk about Ford. Ford is a consensus 4-star prospect. He's not consensus, but he is a top 10 prospect in the state of Pennsylvania. Some have him as a top 5 player in the state. Others have him 12th, for example, just outside of the top 10. But he is that first defensive end in this 2026 class, with Jennings moving to 2025. So you can think of it that way, that Jennings is still there and he just starts his redshirt season if he does end up going through that, which I imagine he will. But you can think of that, well, Penn State's just getting early development for another defensive end prospect in theory here. Ford stands at 6'4", 240 pounds. That is relatively college-ready size. You add, it's easier to add 10 pounds as opposed to 30, right? Math, it adds up there. So if he enrolls early, or when he joins Penn State and actually arrives on campus, he will be pretty close to where he needs to be as that college defensive end. They'll probably bump him up, and he can play both sides. He can be a weak side defensive end or a strong side defensive end. So maybe they do bulk him up to that Denai Dennis Sutton range where he is 260 pounds, 265 pounds, because he plays both sides. You watch the high school film, he's on either side of the line of scrimmage playing both strong side and weak side defensive end. He is a pure pass rusher first and foremost. Most of his highlights, maybe if not all of them, are pass rushing plays. He is making plays, going after the quarterback, disrupting things in the backfield. There are some good run plays in run defense, but it is primarily him chasing after the quarterback, which a lot of Penn State fans are really going to like. I really did think that for someone that is 6'4", 240 pounds, and probably going to put on more weight when he gets to college, as he should, solid closing speed. Somebody that's able to chase down running backs, mobile quarterbacks, a screen play to a wide receiver, and at 6'4", 240, you're able to run the skilled position player down on offense. That is impressive. He utilizes his hands very well. So Ford's best move is the rip move, the swim move, where he just knows the offensive lineman if he can keep the offensive lineman from getting a block, from getting a push with his hands, that's where Ford, I think one of his best techniques is just being able to swipe the hands away from an offensive lineman. So he's very aggressive with the hand fighting. Also, when he can't get to the quarterback, he's very good at getting his hands up and batting the pass down. So that goes along with that 6'4" frame. But this guy just understands, hey, I can be aggressive with my hands and still make plays, even though I'm not completely getting to the quarterback every single time. So whether he gets an actual sack or if he gets a pressure, he's still making a play one way or another, even if it isn't in the backfield. He does have outstanding play recognition ability. I think that's something that stands out on the tape. So between batting the pass down or the read option, a lot of teams that he faced, at least in his junior season, ran a good amount of read option plays. And he doesn't fall for it. He knows when to take the quarterback. He knows when to take the running back. So that play recognition ability, that goes a long way. That's very difficult to teach. So someone who has that instinctive ability to be able to read the read option, dissect it appropriately, and then makes the plays, it's very difficult for some of these offenses to move the football. I do want to, this isn't just positive. I do want to, throw in a couple criticisms here, but nothing that can't be fixed or anything like that. I do think he plays a little too tall at times. I would say that he needs to lower his pad level a little bit, because as the competition increases, they're going to be able to get underneath of that 6'4" frame. And who knows, he might be 6'5" or 6'6" when he's ultimately finished with his development. And it's going to be easy for technically sound offensive tackles, ones that you'll face more routinely, to get underneath your pad level. So I would say that he needs to add a little more bend to his pass rushing moves, and that's fine. That's something simple, and that's something that Penn State really does emphasize. And then I do think he is limited with his pass rushing moves. So if it's working, don't change it. If it's broke, don't fix it. But I think the level of competition right now at high school, you can get away with rip moves, swim moves, just being the better athlete. And he's going to have to refine his technique because you can't just get away with a rip move every single time rushing after Big Ten quarterbacks. You are going to have to develop an arsenal of different moves, different tricks to get around an offensive tackle that you can get away with at the high school level. He still plays good high school competition. It's that prep level. He goes to Malvern Prep High School, so it's that prep level. He's facing really talented players as it is. I still think there is a gap in competition, though, with where he is and what he is facing at Malvern. So Jackson Ford, there's a lot to like here, things that are easily fixable with what he's going to bring to Happy Valley. Much needed commitment that we're going to talk about further on the heels of everything between Notre Dame, Michigan, seeing one of Penn State's quarterback commits flip away. We're going to talk about just how important Ford was in the scheme of things for the class of 2026. Coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Have you ever decided that last minute you want to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. Well, that's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple, and prices on the app actually drop closer as it gets to game time. But it's baseball season, so as it gets closer to first pitch, ticket prices will go down on the app. They've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. And it's not just for sporting events, concerts, comedy, theater events, you name it. If you want to get Penn State football tickets early, you can use Gametime. You can go to the website or go to the Gametime app, and you can browse Penn State football tickets in advance before the season starts. Take the guesswork out of buying those tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Redeem code LOCKEDCOLLEGE, LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. As I've already made clear, Penn State just needed to see one go in. 4 prospects to Notre Dame, potentially up to 4 prospects with Michigan in the scheme of things. There are some other recruitments that haven't gone their way, some offensive line prospects that they've missed out on. So to get a defensive end commitment like this, especially when you did need an edge defender, is a win for Penn State. And they're not settling here. Like I said, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, all of these Big Ten foes, you really had to work for this recruitment. It wasn't just a slam dunk for Penn State. Well, he's an in-state prospect. He's not the top prospect in Pennsylvania. So this one should be easy for Penn State, right? No, the Buckeyes were pushing for him. Michigan would have really wanted this commitment. I know Wisconsin was kind of a quiet dark horse in this recruitment, and Penn State wins. But I think after all of the disappointment, Notre Dame, people aren't talking enough about Michigan. I know that Notre Dame's going to get a lot of the chatter because Penn State faced them in the college football semifinal and lost that game. And then Joey O'Brien and Kari Adams, players that Penn State would have absolutely loved to have in this class of 2026, and they all go to one school. I do think Michigan is being overlooked here too as, mutual offensive line target, mutual defense. I mean, Carter Meadows could end up at Michigan. That's a mutual target there for Penn State. Maybe Penn State's able to come back around and come from behind in that recruitment, but I see him either ending up at Michigan or Ohio State. Marky Walbridge committed to the Wolverines. Dorian Barney, somebody that Penn State definitely needed after Joey O'Brien and Kari Adams going to Michigan. So it is just nice to see Penn State secure a commitment that they wanted all along. They're not settling. There's no debate for, well, they settled here, there were other priority prospects. No, Jackson Ford was the priority here at defensive end from the start, the second this class opened up until now, and Penn State has him committed. So in the scheme of things, when you lose those recruiting battles, when you have a commitment flip, geez, I just went on the record saying, hey, Penn State doesn't have decommitments. They don't have a problem with flips. And lo and behold, Peyton Falzone flips to Auburn. That's why Jackson Ford is so important right now at this time, because hopefully the pendulum that is so far this way in the negative can finally swing back over to the positive and create some more momentum here. You have Pierce Peterson that committed. So with those losses, Penn State is picking up those recruiting wins. Pierce Peterson, tight end prospect, long-term outlook, very high ceiling. You get Jackson Ford, and Penn State's not finished with edge defenders. Penn State is looking to add Tyson Harley. There is a projection for him in 24/7 believes that Tyson Harley, defensive end out of Gonzaga High School in DC, will end up with the Nittany Lions. That's another commitment that you need. You need more than just one defensive end here. Penn State has 2 players that project as a defensive tackle between Alex Haskell and Isaac Chukwurah. You now have Jackson Ford. Okay, you just finished your defensive line if and when you can get a Tyson Harley. And Harley, for what it's worth, is teammates with Emmanuel Iheanacho. So maybe I've mentioned that before. I want to mention it again. Maybe it does factor in the recruitment that, hey, Penn State has a teammate of yours, a friend of yours, join the Nittany Lions there. But that's still going to be very difficult from an NIL perspective for Penn State. So overall, the class of 2026 has been a roller coaster recently. It's because of the volume and how much of a short time and just the 1 or 2 schools that have really cleaned up on the recruiting trail here against Penn State. Those are all the factors that contribute to this. But now with losing Falzone, so you do lose that one commitment here, Penn State does still have over 20 commitments in its class of 2026. And they're not finished. They have at this time, with Jackson Ford committed, they do have 21. Tyson Harley would bring it to potentially 22. They're still looking to add probably 4, 5, 6 more prospects. They usually push for about 26, 27 total prospects there. So that'll be some offensive linemen. Marlon Bright is somebody that I think it's worth for fans to know Tyson Harley, when that commitment does eventually happen. Again, this is a projection, so I don't want to just automatically assume that it's Penn State. And as we all know, anything can change here at a moment's notice, especially in this day and age of college football. But this is still a group that is going to most likely be a top 15 class. And let's finish up with that. We're going to talk about why this group can still be a top 15 class on the other side of this break. We start narrow and then we go wide on these commitment prospect previews after Penn State does secure the commitment from them. So we started with the player in Jackson Ford and then went to the defensive end, defensive line outlook there. You have two defensive tackles with Haskell and Chukwurah. Jackson Ford, you're projected to land Tyson Harley, consensus 4-star. Okay, so you have 4 defensive line prospects because it was looking a little iffy there for Penn State with just the one commit at the time with Isaac Chukwurah. And I know that Daniel Jennings did reclassify to 2025. So that's still discount here in the scheme of things, but it does open up another spot in this roster, in this class of 2026 for Penn State to hopefully get another defensive end. I'm not going to say never with Carter Meadows, but it doesn't look promising with Ohio State and Michigan lingering. Let's just put it that way. And you did lose out on Luke Wafel. So at least for Deion Barnes to rebound in this capacity, I will say this about Penn State and the staff. They're not going down without a fight. So just because they've taken some of these losses here recently doesn't mean that they're just going to, that it's all finished. Well, that it is what it is. You can expect at some point for Penn State to ultimately flip a player or two as the season progresses. We're at the end of June. July is going to have, I think, some good news for Penn State as well. And then they have to prove it within season. Oregon, Ohio State, that is going to give you a lot of credibility in your recruitment. So that's why I say that Penn State right now, when you look at 24/7, I know Rivals and On3 are getting ready to merge. You look at Rivals, they have Penn State as a top 10 class. On3 has them just on the outside at 12 at this point in time. And you have 21 total commitments. These prospects, at least a good handful of them, will see a bump in the recruiting rankings. I think Kevin Brown will be a 5-star when all's said and done. Jasir Rogers will be a very respectable 4-star. I name Terry Wiggins quite routinely. These players are just going to see a boost in their recruiting ranking, which helps with where the class stands for this 2026 cycle. They need offensive linemen. I think if anybody is now under the spotlight, I don't want to say hot seat because their job isn't in jeopardy or anything like that. I am really surprised that Phil Trautwein has lost the recruiting battles that he has, a Marky Walbridge, a Drew Evers. So that prospect that now turns to Penn State's attention is Marlon Bright. So that one becomes more of a need than just a want in this case. Emmanuel Iheanacho, hey, if Penn State pulls that one off, that is purely on the recruiting staff. That really is. But that's where things kind of stand right now for the Nittany Lions. They need offensive linemen. It was nice having 2 quarterbacks. I always kind of fell back on that. Hey, Penn State's got 2 quarterbacks. They have a running back. They have 3 wide receivers. They now have a tight end. They do need some offensive linemen. They have plenty of defensive backs. They have 6 defensive backs. Maybe they add one more. I think 7's kind of pushing the limit there. Penn State did check all of the boxes that they wanted to for the most part. I would say they need 1 or 2 more offensive linemen. Needs. Be nice to get a quarterback. I am putting a little more stock into that move with Falzone to Auburn more than other people might. I do think that one's a big deal with what lies ahead in terms of losing Drew Aller. You're going to lose either Ethan Grunkemeyer or Jackson Smolik to the transfer portal. That solidified your depth chart, and he had a lot of upside for what it's worth. So if he was going to peak, develop at Penn State, Falzone was a really intriguing prospect for the Nittany Lions there. Secondary is loaded. I have no complaints. Again, Joey O'Brien, Kari Adams, Dorian Barney absolutely would have been assets in this class of 2026, but you can't complain with what Terry Smith and Anthony Poindexter have done. Wide receiver recruits are extremely underrated. And that's great to say with everything that Penn State's endured at the wide receiver spot and all of the jokes that they can't develop wide receivers. 2026 class is a really solid group. And Jasir Rogers in particular could play sooner rather than later. 2026 is not going to fall out of the top 20. I think this group is securely in the top 15, and it's why Brian Smith says, hey, with the right additions, this can still be a top 10 group. So there is reason for optimism, and that's saying something about Penn State. Despite all of the losses, despite all the negative momentum that went against them to regional opponents, to teams that I know Penn State's unrivaled, but come on, when we think of the teams that Penn State goes up against the most, Notre Dame, even though they don't play them, they're not in the Big Ten. But Ohio State, Michigan, the fact that Penn State is where it is, despite all of that, is something worth noting. And that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Thank you to each and every one of you for checking out this show. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Really appreciate it. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us a part of your regular routine. And if you're not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams.